Hey there. Welcome to real life. If you don't know where you're at right now, it's okay, because I don't either.
You're in my apartment.
Whoa! Alright.
I'm Maddie.
I'm Cameron.
And even though we're super sad we can't physically be with you guys tonight, we're super pumped because we have a snow day! So this is kind of a unique situation. We're going virtual tonight for the first time ever for the 8th ever snow day in the history of Michigan State. Which is kind of cool. So we're just going to try to keep you in the loop a little bit and share some spotlights with you guys.
Great. The first spotlight we'll be looking at will really make the cold feel less cold, as it'll hopefully bring warmth to your heart. Let's take a look.
Oh man, didn't see you there. Just catching up on my reading here. You may not know me. I'm Ethan Fulcher. But for those of you who do, you know me from my hit music video or for the Wonders Life group. Now, I've been looking at my thermometer recently. These cold days on campus are brutal. Dry skin, whipping winds, sub-zero trench foot, and penetrating frostbite. Sheesh. That's why I spend my winters down here in the toasty basement of Abbott Hall. And I've been real proud of the way we're out here grinding and hollering the Lord's name to all the lost and the hypothermic on campus. That's why I think that we deserve a little change of pace. And guess what? So does Michigan State. Enter spring break. Finally, some rays and relaxation. But gee whiz, have you seen the size of this great nation of ours? Spoiler alert though, it's a doozy. With so many warm and sunny destinations, what do you choose? Now enter crew. Boy, do we have the spring break of a lifetime for you. We'd love for you to join us on our mission trip to reach the lost and the sunburned on the sunny shores of Destin. You'll spend a week chatting with beachgoers about their views on the Lord, our faith, and really using our gifts from God to evangelize and be a light of grace in a contemporary place. But wait, there is more. Why not enjoy the beach for yourself while you're there? You'll be living in a house right at the beach town, just like the locals. And there's plenty to go around. So go get in the water and worship the Lord for His creation and all of His comfort and joy. Now, you can get all of this for the low price of, and it's due by this date. So, we'll see you there.
Thanks, Ethan, for that update.
Wow. Doesn't that look great? You know, speaking of looking great, we've got some awesome pictures we'd like to show you of the destination. Pun.
Wow. Look at that pool.
Wow, awesome. 2-story house. I wonder how many people you could fit in there. Like, wow, a riot. A Christian riot of 20 or so people would be awesome in that house. Look at this next one.
Look at that pool, too.
Uh-huh.
Chip and Joanna would be so proud.
Uh-huh. Doesn't look like negative 20 degrees, that's for sure.
And that looks like you could really thrash at that house.
Yeah, unique pool design right there. Honestly, that's something else.
The shape?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So listen up, everybody. We only have 75 slots. I repeat, 75 slots for you guys to go down to Destin. Yeah. So you might be wondering, wow, these are cool houses, and wow, that pool was really cool. But what exactly is Destin? Well, if you heard of PCB before, you might have a clue. But let me explain. First of all, this is going to involve students from Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. What is that going to look like? It's going to look like a bunch of students coming together for sessions to learn more about what's in the Bible, but also how to share your faith, which is actually a very big point going to Destin. We're going to be going on the beach most days, but doing something you might not expect. We'll actually be sharing our faith and going to talk to literally anybody that we see on the beach. So it's a very unique experience to grow in your faith in that way.
Cam, guess what?
What?
There are 2 fun things happening this Saturday.
2 fun things, oh boy.
2. First one, it's going to be 70 degrees warmer on Saturday than it is today. 70.
Yep.
Okay, second one is a little bit cooler than that. Cooler.
Wow.
It's the Beyond conference that's happening.
Whoa, yes, Beyond. Who's speaking at that?
Roger Hershey.
Oh, yeah.
Who's actually speaking tonight, too, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So the Beyond conference is really focused on God's will and his plan for your future, and just making faithful decisions about your future, and just what's going on in your life.
So, Beyond Conference is from 10 to 6 this Saturday. It'll be in the Cadillac Room. And the really unique thing for students at MSU is that it'll actually be free. So, that's really cool. Make sure to sign up pretty quick, though. We want to make sure we've got everyone going that we know of.
Yeah, food will be provided, so we also want to make sure we have numbers so that everyone can eat. So sign up.
So maybe you're disappointed that we didn't end up having parents' night tonight. Maybe your parent flew all the way from California just to find out that the weather ended up closing real life. Well, don't be too mad. Real life is now moved to 3/14. You heard that. 3/14 is parents' night. So look out for that.
It's the most special day of the year because it is Pi Day.
3.14?
159 265 35 89 79
Yep.
32
248167.
Nope.
It's not actually in there.
Freshmen, there was supposed to be a calf crawl for you guys tomorrow, but because of the kind of chilly weather that just didn't seem super great, it is being postponed. So stay tuned, stay updated. There will be announcements about when that is moved to. Stay warm.
Stay cozy.
Stay hungry.
Thanks for tuning in to the Kurt and Kiss Show. The rest of this video is going to be closed out by our speaker, Roger Hershey, who's also speaking at the Beyond Conference.
Roger, I hardly know her.
Just so you guys know, Roger Hershey's been around the crew scene for some decades now. You could say he's a veteran crew staff member, or...
a crew celebrity.
Yes. And he's been very influential over the past few decades, speaking to various crew students over many states, and he's got a lot of good things to say. So we're looking forward to hear what Roger Hershey has to say tonight. Stay cozy.
Stay warm. Stay hungry.
Well, welcome to our virtual real life from my office. And this is Bree, as you probably remember. But I wanted to introduce our speaker. But before I do, this night wouldn't be possible without Ryan Wagner. So can we give Ryan Wagner a hand?
Yeah!
Woo! Yeah. So Hirsch wanted an audience, and so Jack and Nick are the audience, and Bree, who's found something more interesting. But we've been doing a series called Multiply, and whether you know it or not, Spartans have a long legacy of spiritual multiplication. And by that I mean that someone long ago reached out to someone who reached out to someone who reached out to someone who reached out to you. And Michigan State's had a long history of this, and it all actually goes back to this guy Hirsch, who we're going to hear from tonight, because he trained me, he trained Robin, he trained Mary, he trained us, who trained the staff and the students in this idea of spiritual multiplication, and it's had an impact on you. And so I'm excited that you get to hear from Hirsch. He came in early for the Beyond Conference, which you already heard about. So in many ways, Hirsch is our sensei, our Jedi Master, which I'm speaking to our audience here, of Jack and Nick, and Bree, who loves Star Wars too. So, yeah, so let's give it up for Hirsch.
Keep going. Well, hey, I am I'm delighted to be here in East Lansing. This is a unique way of communicating to all of you Spartans, but this should be fun, fireside chat. I'm going to be here tonight and tomorrow, and then hopefully many of you can get in on Saturday at the Beyond Day, where I'll be talking about, pretty significant questions like what the heck are you going to do with your life when you graduate? Mm-hmm. How do you know God's will? How do I discern how He's leading me? We're going to talk about all that kind of good stuff. So, but that's Saturday. But right now I want to get into this topic of multiply to fit in with the series you've been doing here. I graduated from Penn State. Don't hold that against me, because you notice I am wearing a nice Spartan shirt. So anyway, but I graduated in '72, and while in college, I made the three biggest decisions of my life: master, mission, and mate. All three of them were made while I was a Penn State student because of things I learned by being involved in the movement, the crew movement there at Penn State. One of the things that was so huge for me as a student was coming to grips with the issue of significance. One of my favorite authors is a guy named Larry Crabb, and he suggested this in different books he's written. He said, two of our deepest longings in our life are security and significance. That every person wants security, meaning they want to know they belong, they're loved, they're part of a group, they're accepted, they have intimacy, community, but also significance. That is, every person wants to know their life matters, that I have value, I'm contributing, I'm significant into somebody else's life. We all want significance. So I know my story in college was I got into all the things I got into going all the way back to high school, and a lot of it was related to trying to get my need for significance met. You know, in high school I was in all kinds of stuff, and that continued in college. In college I was in the marching band my freshman, sophomore year. I joined a fraternity, and then I was on the cheerleading squad. And you go ahead and chuckle about that as you sit there, guys, but hey, I got hugs and kisses after every touchdown. You know what I mean? So being a cheerleader was a good deal. Anyway, but you know, I look back, and the reason I threw myself into so many things, though I didn't know it at the time, was I was trying to get my need for significance met by filling my life up with all kinds of activities that felt significant. You know, if I were to ask you, as you look back on your life in high school, maybe now in college, what were you involved in that felt really significant? You know, if I were to ask you that question, if we were all together in the normal meeting room, I was going to, and all of you would share different things. You were part of a sports team that did well, you were in a play or a musical, or you did well academically. You all had things you were a part of that felt significant, but then if I also ask you, how many of you had the experience that almost within days after you accomplished something significant, the thrill and the glory of it just faded away? Most of you would identify with that. There's a book I read a couple of years ago called Into Thin Air. And I don't know if you're familiar with the book, but it's John Krakauer's book about climbing Mount Everest. You guys know this book? My audience doesn't know this book. Anyway, John Krakauer in 1996 led a team of 8 people up Mount Everest. And John in his book describes what it was like. And he'd been preparing for months, even years, to reach the top of Mount Everest. That was for him what would have been so significant and glorious and exciting. And in his book, I have an exact quote. He led a team of 9 up to the top of Mount Everest. And 6 of the 9 made it to the top. But he said this in his book. He says, quote, "I'd been fantasizing about this moment and the release of emotion that would accompany it for months. But now that I was finally here, actually standing on the summit of Mount Everest, I just couldn't summon the energy to care." He said, "Reaching the top of Everest is supposed to trigger a surge of intense elation, but the summit was really only the halfway point. Any impulse I might have felt towards self-congratulation was extinguished by overwhelming apprehension about the long, dangerous descent that lay ahead." And indeed, of the 6 that made it to the top, Krakauer and one other made it back down. 4 others died on the descent.
Wow.
So the irony is, here's a guy who committed so much of his life to what felt to him to be so significant, and he gets to the very top, and he couldn't even enjoy it. And that is true of so many of the things that we've given our life to in an effort to feel significant, like we're contributing, like our life makes a difference. You know, when I was in college, I said I was a cheerleader and I was in a band for a couple years, and I loved college football, and I still do. I'm a diehard Nittany Lion fan. And I know you like your football, but I know you especially like your basketball. And you guys are doing well, right? 6th in the nation, something like that? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows? But here's the thing I found. I looked up the record of when you guys won your last basketball national championship. Do you know when it is? Audience, do you know when it is?
2000.
2000. Yeah, 2000. And you think about every year you get excited for could our team win the whole thing. You go to the games, you're excited. Every year I get excited about could my team win a national championship this year. And the reality is the last national championship we won was in 1986, 32 years ago. 18 years ago you won your last national basketball title. So I hope you do well this year. But my point is this. So often the things that we think are going to give us a thrill and exciting and be significant are so temporary and fade away so quickly. And so that's what happened to me in college. I got involved with crew. I came into school when I wasn't a believer. I was a believer. What am I saying? I was a believer, but I wasn't walking with the Lord. And then what happened that's totally changed the trajectory of my life was January of my freshman year, I met a guy named Larry, who was a junior, in our dining hall. And got to chatting with Larry, and he discovered I was a believer, but not really walking. Larry was a junior leader in the crew movement there at Penn State. And he started to initiate with me, started to spend time with me, because he could tell hidden underneath my life full of busy activities was a real hunger for Christ and a real hunger to walk with Jesus. I just had never cultivated it. And my busyness was so many things and girlfriends and all the rest, I'd never cultivated my walk with the Lord. So Larry, as a junior, dove into my life. He got me in his Bible study in the dorm. He started to spend time with me one-on-one, started building my life, took me to play racquetball. And he's the guy that helped walk me through my own journey of coming to the point of finally saying, okay, Jesus, you got to be the Lord of my life. I can't keep living for all these other things and girlfriends and everything else. So Larry was that junior who invested in me as a freshman. And Larry continued to invest in my life into my sophomore year when I moved into a fraternity. And even though he wasn't in a fraternity and he wasn't leading a fraternity ministry, he still regularly just kept discipling me and being involved in my life while I was in the fraternity. And I was the only guy in my house that was spiritually motivated. But Larry just kept investing in me. Well, I'll tell you more about what happened to me later, but I want to look at a passage with you. So you're there in small groups. They're there in groups, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Grab a Bible if you got one, or your cell phone, or write. Guys like these, Nick and Jack, probably know this by memory. So anyway, but I want you to look at one passage, and because I think this passage really speaks to one of the longings of our soul, which is significance. We're going to talk about specifically significance, not so much security, but significance. And I think this passage is where Jesus is tapping into that deep longing in these disciples' souls to know that their life mattered. So here's the passage, Matthew chapter 4, if you got your Bible there. Guys, if you forgot your Bible and you're there with a group of sisters, just snuggle up to one of them, throw your arm around her and say, oh, sweetheart, I forgot the word. Share the word with me. Just lean in there. You know what I mean? It's kind of a way to... Anyway, giving you an opportunity here, boys. Don't blow it. All right. Look at this passage, Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 to 22. Ready? Here we go. And walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. and they immediately left the nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in the boat with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets. And again, he called to these two. And notice, they immediately left the boat and their father and followed him. So here are the first four men, really, that Jesus called to come follow him to be disciples. Now, I want to just make a couple observations from this passage. These fellows lived in Capernaum. Capernaum was a small village about 80 miles from Jerusalem. It's just a small little fishing village. I've been there. I've walked the dusty streets of Capernaum, and it's literally not much. It's a village. But as I walk those streets, the original foundations of many of their homes are still there, and the synagogue, partial walls of the foundation of the synagogue are there. This is a little fishing village. There's not much to it. There was no sports arena, no movie theater during the time of Peter, John, James, all these boys. I can't imagine they had much in their life. Now, maybe they played a little hacky sack. Maybe they had a soccer ball. I don't know. But there was nothing to life except fishing. It was a fishing town. It's right on the Sea of Galilee. So these guys spent their whole life, every day, getting up with their dad, with Zebedee and their father, and the other guy's father, getting in a boat and going out to the Sea of Galilee and hauling in fish. And that was literally their life. Probably most of their life revolved around Jewish holidays, going to the temple, because of course Jewish life was revolved around the synagogue. And that's all life was. They had nothing special. So here comes Jesus, and he's going to step into their life. Now, what's significant is, one of the things that was common for young Jewish men around Israel was for young men to attach themselves to a rabbi in their village. And the idea was they would spend as much time as they would, literally attach themselves to a rabbi to learn from him. And they were highly esteemed if a rabbi wanted to spend time with them, and they would seek to learn as much as they could by being with a rabbi. Get the picture. So this was a common practice. One of the things you got to ask when you read a text like this is why they responded so quickly. Notice what we read in that text is when he called them, it said they immediately left the nets and followed him. Now, if you think about it, that's pretty incredible. Most of our stories, you know, the first time we heard about Jesus and we started to grow and learn, most of us probably didn't jump in full bore, all aboard. We had a lot of questions, a lot of hesitations, had to learn a lot. Even for these guys, it wasn't like this was the first time they met Jesus. In fact, in the chronology of the gospel, when you put the four gospels together chronologically and you look what happened, you'll see that they had experienced Jesus before. They'd seen him do some miracles. They'd seen him turn water into wine in John 2, it's recorded. They'd seen him heal lepers, cast out demons. They'd seen him teach. On one occasion, he showed up when they were out fishing, and they were fishing. Luke chapter 5 records this. They were fishing all night and didn't catch anything. And Jesus comes up to them and says, "Cast your nets on the other side." And Peter says, "Lord, we've been fishing all night and caught nothing." But he does it anyway. He obeys. And they pull in this massive haul of fish. And so that was a point in which they saw Jesus the carpenter show up in their world and point to them how to fish. And so this wasn't their first encounter with Jesus, right? They had seen him and heard him. They had begun to experience that this rabbi was different than any other rabbi they had ever met. Because of all the, not only because of all the things he did, but because of the claims he made. He had already, even previous to their encounter with him, was starting to say things that led them to believe that this possibly was the Messiah. And when he was in his hometown of Nazareth, he quoted the passage from Isaiah chapter 61, which is a messianic passage. And he said, "Today in your hearing, this passage is fulfilled." So, here's the thing. These guys, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, had already started to believe that this teacher, which rabbi means teacher, was something way different than any other rabbi. And they were starting to become convinced that maybe he was indeed the Messiah. Now, they didn't fully understand that yet. They didn't fully comprehend what that meant. But they'd begun to believe, and they knew this rabbi was different. He was special. So if you got to imagine, when this rabbi then comes to him, it was an honor when any rabbi said to a young Jewish boy, come and follow me and learn from me. That was an honor for any young Jewish man. But when Jesus said this to these four, this rabbi, different, greater than any other rabbi, when he said, you come follow me, this had to rock their worlds. This was incredible. So I think that's why you see in this passage, as soon as he called them, they responded immediately. They left their fishing business with their dad and began to follow Jesus. Pretty incredible. Since that was their whole life, fishing with their dad. And all of a sudden they're up and they're going to follow Jesus. Now, what I want you to notice also in this passage is Jesus really calls them to two things here. He says, look at verse 19 again if you still have your Bible open. He says, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. He calls them to two things here. One, he calls them to himself. And secondly, he calls them to a mission. Or another way to put it, he calls them to a person and he calls them to a purpose. So he says, first of all, follow me. And he's inviting them to begin to spend time with him. And the next 2.5 years, that's exactly what they did. They went everywhere that Jesus went. And they let him rub off on them. They began to be captured by who Jesus was. They began to be enamored with the things he said. So they first called them to him, and that's what Jesus is calling us to himself, to relationship, to him as a person. But secondly, he's calling them to a purpose, to a mission. Because notice he says, I will make you fishers of men. Now he's speaking to fishermen, so they knew something about what it meant to fish. But probably they really didn't have a clue yet what it meant that they were going to be fishers of men. It's doubtful they understood, except that probably what they heard when they heard Jesus say was, oh my, this is going to be incredibly significant because this rabbi is saying we are going to make some kind of difference in people's lives, even though they probably didn't understand fishers of men quite yet. Now, as you go on through the rest of the Gospels, obviously what you observe is what they did after this, the next 2.5 years, as they followed Jesus wherever he went. They walked those dusty trails with him. They sat around campfires with him, eating fish together and talking. And they heard him talk about the Father. They heard him share from the Old Testament scripture. Of course, there was no New Testament yet, obviously. That was to be written by them. Mm-hmm. All right? But he shared with them probably from many of the messianic prophecies in the Old Testament. And he was opening up their hearts and minds to see that he, the Messiah, was revealed in the scriptures. But many other things. They watched Jesus pray. In fact, they were so moved by the way Jesus prayed, they asked him, Lord, teach us how to pray like you do. But they saw so many other things. They watched Jesus' compassion. And you know this. You read the Gospels. They watched Jesus touch lepers. They watched him engage an adulterous woman and extend grace and forgiveness. They watched him go have dinner with tax collectors and sinners, which riled up the self-righteous Pharisees. So again, here is Jesus very different in that he is mingling with people and showing love and compassion with people that normal rabbis didn't do. So they followed him for the next 2.5 to 3 years. They saw him cross cultural boundaries as he moved beyond relating to Jews to Samaritans, and yea, even to Gentiles. Both of whom the Jews hated, both Samaritans and Gentiles. So again, they followed him for the next 2.5 years. And of course, as you know from the gospel story, they went from 12, and he sent them out 2 by 2 to proclaim the gospel. And then there were 70, and he sent them out 2 by 2 to proclaim the gospel. And then there were 120 in the upper room. And then he appeared to 500 of them after his resurrection to convince them he had really risen from the dead. And then at Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, when Peter preached the first gospel message, 3,000 people became believers. So here's the point. the whole point of Jesus' plan was that he invested in these 12 who he called, and he said, come follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. And that is the beginning of with the church. And here we are 2,000 years later, and we are thriving all over the world, here at Michigan State and everywhere, even at the University of Michigan, even there they believe. Amazing. But anyway, and it all started because of what Jesus did with the 12. All right? Which is why I recommend this book to you. Some of you may have read this. It's called The Master Plan of Evangelism. This is a book by Robert Coleman, and it's a study, it's a simple study, but profound, of what Jesus did with the 12 disciples and how he called them, how he built into them, how he spent time with them, how he modeled ministry for them. I read this book in college, and it, as I said earlier, it changed the whole trajectory of my life. And what gripped me from it, as I poured into this, and as Larry continued to disciple me, Larry continued to disciple me my sophomore year, and then junior year, a guy named Larry graduated, and a guy named Dave, who was on the staff there at Penn State, began to disciple me. And he took me and 3 other fraternity guys, and we began to reach out in the Greek system at Penn State. We had like 45 fraternities and like 25 sororities, big Greek system, and nobody was doing anything to reach anybody. And so Larry led me and 3 other guys, and we started to do outreach. We started to go around speaking in fraternities, at chapter meetings, began to have appointments with guys, began to share our faith. One of the things that both Larry and Dave modeled to me when they discipled me was that following Jesus was more than just sitting at Starbucks and having a good conversation, but it was entering into the mission with Jesus. And the reality that captured me was that the day I put my trust in Christ, because Jesus is on a mission, that means I'm on a mission with him. Sometimes we think, well, following Jesus is just about walking with Jesus, right? Isn't that what it's all about? Just walk with Jesus. And my response to that is, yeah, but where's Jesus walking? And he's walking to every part of this campus, right? Amen. Every part of this campus, Jesus wants to walk there. Of course, he wants to do the walking through us, because Jesus lives in us. He walks through us to every part of campus, and he wants to walk to every part of the world. You got the idea. You know that. You Spartans know all this because you got such great leaders. Brian, Robin, Mary. Anyway, you know that's what we're all about, right? In Crew, we want to walk with Jesus where he's walking. Well, that's what happened to me in college. And when we started our fraternity ministry, as an example of all this, there were the 4 of us original guys, beginning of my junior year. By the end of my senior year, we had 35 men in small group Bible studies. And we did that, came about because we shared our faith a lot. We spoke in houses. We got appointments with people. Guys came to Christ. In the process of sharing our faith, we found other Christians who were in houses out there that didn't know that there was anything going on. And once they realized, wow, something's happening, they wanted to be a part of it. And I got to share with you, one of the things that so persuaded me of the significance, which is our topic, of what we were doing in our discipleship ministry was actually 2 years after I came back from graduating. I went back to campus and I went to the weekly meeting. You call it real life? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I went back to our meeting. And after the meeting, I met a guy named Doug, who was new to Crew. And he started telling me his story. He started telling me how he came to Christ. And as he was telling me, he mentioned a guy named Lee. And I said, you mean Lee Carrere? He said, yeah, Lee in the Theta Delta Chi House. I said, really? I know Lee. And I knew Lee because Lee had been led to Christ and discipled by Jack. And I knew Jack well because Zeke had led Jack to Christ. And I knew Zeke well because I discipled Zeke. So I'm standing here talking to Doug, who had been discipled by Lee, who had been discipled by Jack, who had been discipled by Zeke, who I discipled. And I realized I'm talking to my spiritual great-great-grandson in the faith. This is 2 years after I graduated. And so things like that just further cemented that when I began the relationship with Jesus and I began to understand what it meant to be on mission and to be involved in discipleship, that when I embraced that conviction that I want to do more than just show up to a weekly meeting or show up to a Bible study, I want someone to invest in me and I want to turn around and build my life into somebody else. When I realized, oh my gosh, I can make a difference on who knows how many hundreds of people's lives over the course of my life simply by investing in a few other people, who invest in a few other people, who invest in a few other people, which I think Brian, in one of your earlier meetings, did that example, right, bro? Mm-hmm. Where you had the person on crutches come up and the person who was really fast and the guy on crutches, because he multiplied, reached more people more quickly. So here's the deal. In college, I did all the stuff, band, fraternity, cheerleader, because I wanted my life to be significant. When I discovered that by following Jesus, I could be a fisher of men, and by investing my life in other people, that's where real significance could come from, because I can make a difference in other people's lives. So often today in the church, you think, well, who's really significant? We think, well, I got to be a mega church pastor, right? I got to stand up in front of 2,000 people. Well, some of you may do that because of your gifting. You may have a gifting to teach and may do that. The majority of us won't do that. And yet the majority of us can have a phenomenal impact on the world by just investing in a few, who invest in a few, who invest in a few. And you can start that right here at Michigan State. So my application, obviously, in Crew, we're pretty serious about the Great Commission. We're pretty serious about making disciples. And so I would say to you, if one, you're not being discipled right now, take an opportunity, pursue someone who can begin to invest in discipling you. And perhaps you're at a point where you're saying, I would like to turn around and start to disciple one or two other people. And you can talk to your other student leaders in the movement where to begin and who you might begin to invest in. But you can start to have the privilege of investing in a few other people as well. All right? Well, to wrap this up, I would love to do this. Love to tell you a couple stories of people who graduated from here at Michigan State, and I'll throw in a few from my own experience on campus, who are having an impact around the world because they were discipled here, because they plugged into being discipled and discipling others. I'll mention just a couple. There's a couple named Paul and Rana who graduated from here. Neither of them were believers when they came to school here. And I won't get into all the details, but they were led to Christ by other students here at Michigan State. And then they got involved in the discipleship and grew in their faith. And Paul and Rana both came on our staff. But neither of them were believers when they came here. But someone, upperclassmen, dove into their life as freshmen and reached them and started to disciple them. Other people, I want to tell you about a couple named Dave and Kelly Carlson, who also were believers who were involved. I don't know if they came to Christ here or they were already believers.
They were believers.
They were believers. But they got involved in the movement, got discipled here. And then they went on breakthrough stint for a year. And without, again, all the details, now Dave and Kelly, because of God capturing their heart to reach Muslim people, he's now pastoring a church in Dearborn, Michigan, seeking to reach Muslim people. Again, it started here when someone invested their life in him. And there's others. Let me tell you about Tracy Enners. She's a gal that graduated here from State a few years back, and I just saw her in Spain at the Stint Mid-Year Conference. And she's using her gifting in event planning, and she's on the national conference team with Crew, and helps plan and run conferences all over the country. Helped run this conference in Spain. She also discipled here at Michigan State, and now she's using her gifts to serve the Lord as an event and conference planner. Here's one more I want to tell you about from State. A guy named Jake Fowler. And again, I guess nobody knows these folks because they were a few years ago, right?
Some might know Jake.
Yeah, some might know Jake Fowler. But here's the fun thing. I gave you these examples and different walks of life, pastors, staff. Here's a guy in the business world. Jake is in the marketplace, living out his calling to serve Christ as a businessman in Chicago. And one of the cool things, Brian got this text from him. And he's talking about, of course, he's had a passion and he's been sharing his faith and leading people to Christ in the business world there in Chicago. And he sent a text to share with Brian the opportunities he's having in the church. And he said this, I'll just read it to you. He says, 6 months ago, I started going to a small group at Park Community Church in Chicago. And recognized pretty quickly that many of the folks didn't know what it meant to really be an ambassador for Christ. He says the depth at which they studied the Word was incredible, and their intimacy in prayer was amazing. And there's a lot that I'm still learning from them in those things. But I also recognized that I had a lot to give. He said very few of them knew how to share the gospel. So he began to help them learn how to share the gospel. He realized this is something he had to offer because of what he learned as a Michigan State student. And so just 2 weeks ago, we were sharing updates in the group. And every single one of the 12 guys, apparently there's about 12 guys in the group, every single one of the 12 guys shared about a conversation they had had the previous week in sharing the gospel with someone in the marketplace. Isn't that amazing? And Jake was able to help these guys learn how to share their faith. And now many of these guys who hadn't really learned that are now getting involved in being on mission in the marketplace. And so that's something that Jake had to contribute because of what he learned here as a Spartan through the crew ministry. When you graduate from here, wherever the Lord leads you, whatever your calling is, in the marketplace, in missions, in the church, because of what you've learned in evangelism and discipleship, you can pass that on wherever you go. I want to share I'll share a couple examples, if time allows. Is it good? We good still? Of people, and these are all examples of every one of these people I'm going to mention. Someone, an upperclassman, led these people to Christ when they were freshmen and discipled them and got involved in their life, which is what I'm inviting you to do. There's a guy named Larry who's now an Army colonel. He just was promoted to a full colonel in the U.S. Army. He works at the Pentagon. We got to see him this summer. He's one of our faithful ministry partners. He gave us the tour of one small part of the Pentagon. And here's a guy who is a full colonel in the U.S. Army. He has 2,000 men under his care that he's responsible for spiritually as an Army chaplain. And he has several Army chaplains under him. And the amazing thing is, I remember when Larry came to Christ his freshman year, when an upper class student did an outreach in his dorm and found him there. He was hungry to know the Lord, and he led him to Christ. And Larry went on to, after college, did a bunch of different things, had no idea he'd end up becoming an Army chaplain. And here he is, having an impact in the Pentagon for Christ. He has clearance into the nuclear command center of our nation. Somebody led him to Christ as a freshman on campus. There's another guy named Sean. Sean also, same story, got involved, got discipled, got involved with us. When he graduated, he went on to law school. And while there, God gave him a passion over the horrible, horrible evil of sex trafficking, slave trade. And when he graduated from law school, he went to work with International Justice Mission, which probably most people know about. And he's now the president of International Justice Mission. And he's helping with that organization, helping free hundreds and hundreds of women from that evil practice of the slave trade. Dan was a guy that got involved in our ministry and was a believer, but didn't understand the spirit-filled life, didn't know how to walk with Jesus, didn't understand grace, got involved, got discipled by upperclassmen. Now he's an orthopedic surgeon in Kenya, and took his gifting in medicine, went on to med school. Upon graduation, knew that he wanted to go to a part of the world where he could share the gospel with people who've never heard. So he's now an orthopedic surgeon helping heal the bones of hundreds of Kenyans every month. And he's also training African nationals who come from all over Kenya in orthopedic surgery and how to share their faith. So last guy is a guy named John, who, by the way, some of these stories you'll hear a little more of if you're able to come to Beyond this Saturday, which I hope you do, because I'm going to tell the stories of how God helped them discern their calling. But the last one's John, who is a guy who graduated from Miami, who had a passion for and gifting in the area of business. He went with Northwest Airlines, but God had also given him a passion to reach people in East Asia, because he went on a summer mission to East Asia. Came back, and he knew he had to invest his life helping reach people in East Asia. And so he went back to a large city in that country, which I can't say the name of, but as a businessman with Northwest Airlines, and he paired up with a bunch of other businessmen and women, and they started to plant a church in this large city in East Asia, an expat church, and that church has now 5,000 people coming out on Sunday mornings from 60 different nations. He's a guy also that got involved in our movement, got discipled, learned how to share his faith, learned how to disciple others, In fact, when I went to Miami of Ohio, I started to work with him as a junior, and he was the first man in the fraternity ministry at Miami of Ohio. And when we started that ministry with just him and 2 other young adult guys, after 2 years we had about 70 men in small group Bible studies. And John was the leader of that. And the things he learned about how to have a ministry, how to reach out to people in his house, how to lead small groups, how to disciple, all that stuff, he was then able to take as he went overseas to East Asia as a businessman and use that, and he's been using it for the last 30 years in that country. Those are just a few stories. I think you get the point of what I'm trying to say and what has been said about multiplying through the last 4 weeks at your real life meetings. We're serious about this. We believe you can multiply your life. You can multiply your life and have an impact for Christ the rest of your life. And so my encouragement to you is take advantage of learning everything you can while you're here as a Spartan, and invest your life in other people and prepare yourself for a lifetime of ministry by learning right here how to do that. And Jesus has called us to become fishers of men. Not just to hang out and go to good meetings or hang out in Starbucks, which is good. He's called us to be fishers of men. We're on mission. So that's what we're all about. Well, this has been fun. I got a great audience right here. Nick, Jeff, yo, Betty, Robin. And I smell the wafting of the food in the kitchen. So I'm going to end here so I can enjoy dinner. Hopefully many of you, I'll see you on Saturday Beyond. Hopefully you will come. We'll talk about God's will. And how do you think about what the heck you're going to do when you graduate? Great to be with you, Spartans. And don't tell any of your Michigan friends that Hershey said it, but I hope you beat the Wolverines, win the Big Ten. All right. See you guys.
Thanks for joining us again on the Kurt and Kiss Show. It's been a pleasure having you. Stay cozy.
Stay warm.
Stay hungry.
And stay cute.
We'll see you around.